over the past 2 Sundays through our Holy Waters sermon series. We heard about Jesus calming the storm that raged within the disciples as well as the storm that raged around them. And then we heard Jesus talking to the woman at the well about a different kind of water, a living water, a water that could breach the walls that had divided men from women, Jews from Greeks, one religious group from another. Holy waters. And today, we hear this story of the Apostle Paul on a ship as he is being brought from Jerusalem to Rome to go before Caesar. Paul was in prison on false charges. He knew they were false, but no one in Jerusalem was willing to say so. And so he exercised a right he had, actually a birthright, the right to appear before Caesar to state his case, to be exonerated. So he exercised that birthright, and the authorities had to arrange to get him to Rome to appear before Caesar. He was assigned to a Roman centurion by the name of Julius, who would be his escort guard on this voyage. First, they boarded a small boat in Caesarea that made the voyage north up along the shore of Asia Minor. And in Myra, the centurion Julius found a larger ship that was going directly to Italy and nearby Rome. So they transferred all 276 passengers onto this larger vessel and set sail. And verse 9 in this passage tells us that a long time had passed because the winds were not favorable for their journey. And it was now, we are told, past the Day of Atonement, which meant that it was either late September or early October. And Paul knew that this was not a wise time to be sailing across the Mediterranean Sea. He advised them to stay put and wait. But the ship captain and the owner of the ship said, no, we must move on. And so they set sail again for Italy. And then we're told that a storm came. Some translations of the scripture say it was a nor'easter. How many of you know what a nor'easter is? Yeah. How many of you are from New England? Yeah, there we go. Anyone from New England knows the power of a nor'easter. They, in fact, can be more deadly and dangerous than a hurricane because they can come so quickly and so fiercely. So we're told this nor'easter was coming, and they were going to be facing this storm head on. As the storm worsened and they were tossed to and fro, they knew they had to do something. The crew was becoming more frantic. So they took several measures to try to steady the ship. First, we're told they lowered the gear into the water. This probably referred to what is known as a sea anchor. It's basically a parachute that you throw over the stern. It catches all the water to slow the boat down. But we're told that this did not do the trick. They still did not have full control of their vessel. Next, we're told they threw cargo overboard to lighten the load of the vessel. That apparently didn't do much good. Then we're told they threw the ship's extra tackle overboard, the rigging gear and so on that they didn't need at that moment, which is a risky move, because they might need that gear, that tackle later. It sort of tells us how desperate they were becoming as they're tossed to and fro in this storm. And finally, we're told that in the middle of the night, some translations have it, they heard the waves crashing on the rocks. There is nothing, not hardly any other sound that a sailor does not want to hear than the sound of waves crashing on the rocks. You know immediately you are at risk of having your ship tossed on the shore, on the rocks. It can be one of the most frightening sounds a sailor can hear. I can still vividly recall one day when we were sailing from Portland, Maine to Boothbay Harbor in fog so thick that I could not see Gary on the bow of our little boat. And we're sailing along, and all of a sudden, I heard waves crashing on rocks. I won't tell you what I said, but let be it sufficient to say I was concerned. One must take immediate action, and this was before the time of advanced GPS and so on, so we were really winging it. But thankfully, we made the right decisions and pulled into Boothbay Harbor, and the sun came out. But that is one of those sounds that will get your attention as a sailor faster than pretty much any other sound. So surely this crew of the ship that Paul was on knew that they were in imminent danger of being washed ashore and the ship breaking up. So in the dark, they took one last drastic action. They threw over one, then two, then three, and then a fourth anchor. And we are told in this passage, the anchors held the boat firm and secure. And they were able to see the new day come, the sunlight, so they could see what was happening. Those 4 anchors probably saved their lives, certainly helped them to survive the storm. I think this story invites us to think about what anchors do we have at our disposal that will hold us firm when the storms of life come our way. I'd like to share 4 anchors that I have found through my life experience and as a pastor sharing with others as we've gone through storms of life. These are the anchors of listening, laughing, learning, and loving. Let's take a look at these anchors. The first anchor we can cast out is the anchor of listening. What I mean by this anchor is that it is the ability and the desire to listen for that still small voice. That still small voice that speaks to us in the silence. A couple of weeks ago, I spoke about the importance of taking time to be still, to be quiet, to listen for that still small voice when we are troubled and when we are facing a storm. That voice, for most of us, does not come from out there, up there somewhere, but comes from the center of our being, from our soul. St. Augustine said, at least it is said he said, silence is the language of God. Silence is the language of God. I think what he knew was that it is only in silence that we are most likely able to hear that still small voice within that is speaking to us. And so it's not only dangerous for sailors, not to listen for horns and bells and whistles and other vessels and the waves crashing against the shore. But it's also dangerous for us to try and go through the storms of life without listening to that still small voice. We also do well to listen to the insights and wisdom of others who know us and love us, and who have faced their own storms. Not so they can tell us what to do, but so that they can travel the journey with us and bolster us and support us and share us. And maybe in listening to them, we'll gain encouragement and maybe even some direction as we face our storms. Listening can be a helpful anchor as we hear God's word for us, as well as the loving, supporting wisdom of others. The second anchor we can cast out is the anchor of laughing. Yes, laughing. I think one of the worst things we can do in the midst of a storm is to lose our sense of humor, to lose that ability to laugh, maybe at the absurdity of the situation, maybe to laugh at our own sort of belief that we are in control of things and we can solve everything. And it's really good when we have a friend or friends who can just help us laugh at the silliest things. Laughter can be healing. Norman Mailer wrote about how when he was fighting cancer, he would spend hours watching the Three Stooges, laughing his head off. While he was having chemotherapy, he'd watch the Three Stooges. And there are studies that give a strong indication that laughter is healing for the body, mind, and soul. And Jesus did laugh. If you look at the scriptures close enough, you'll see times when you just have to know Jesus was laughing. One of my favorite portraits or pictures of Jesus is a drawing entitled The Laughing Jesus. Have you seen it? Isn't it wonderful? Jesus roaring laughter. Laughter is a wonderful anchor that literally can be a lifesaver. And the third anchor that we can cast out when we're facing the storms of life is the anchor of learning. The anchor of learning. M. Scott Peck, in his book, The Road Less Traveled, starts his book off with the first line is, life is hard. Life is hard. There are storms that will come, he knows. And so he writes about that. The fact is, we know life is hard at times, and pretty easy and wonderful at times. But we can be pretty sure the storms of life will come. The question is not whether they'll come, but maybe when they'll come, and how will we get through them? What anchors do we have to hold us as we endure those storms of life? The anchor of learning can be critically important, because if we do in fact have a series of 1, 2, 3 or more storms in our life, it's important to look at what did we learn from the prior storms and how we handled them. What worked for us, each of us individually? What was helpful? What was not helpful? Who was helpful to us? Who was not helpful? We can learn from prior experiences of how God wants to help us through these storms in ways that work best for each of us individually. We can learn by looking in the past in terms of how we might handle the future. And the last anchor that we can cast out that I want to share with you today is the anchor of loving. One of the best things we can do for ourselves and for others is to keep on loving, and to do it in tangible ways. When we are feeling pretty down or pretty beat up maybe, one of the best things we can do is go out and engage in acts of loving kindness for others, to help somebody else, maybe somebody who's worse off than we are. There's just tremendous healing capacity that comes with reaching out and helping others. We bless them, but we also bless ourselves. So to love others by helping them in the midst of the storm can help us to hold fast. And also, and maybe this is even more difficult to do, is to allow others to love us and to help us and to share acts of loving kindness. I know I grew up in a household and in New England as a Yankee where we're told to be self-sufficient and independent and not ask for help. That's dangerous when we're in the midst of the storms. Allowing others to share their love and their kindness by doing simple acts of kindness for us can be a blessing for them and a blessing for us. And it can be an anchor that can hold us firm. Loving God, loving others, and letting others love us can be a wonderful anchor. As you've noticed, each of our anchors have been anchored in the love of God through Jesus Christ, who went through his own storms of life, as we know. Anchoring all we do in God's love, in our faith, surest way I know to hold fast in the storms of life. These are just 4 anchors that I have learned along the way can be helpful. I'm sure there are many more anchors that are helpful. Maybe you've been thinking of some this morning that have helped you through the storms of life. I'd really like to know what those anchors are that you have found helpful. So that's why I'm inviting you to come and join others and me for a brief time of a sermon talkback. Maybe to share what you have found helpful in the storms of life that have come your way. That could be a fun and wonderful conversation. I hope you'll join us. I've worn this particular stole the last 3 Sundays during the Holy Waters sermon series. The symbol on this, if you hadn't noticed up close, is the anchor cross. The anchor cross. It goes back to the earliest days of our faith, and is a symbol of hope and assurance and security that we have in God, the God who is always with us, even in this life and beyond. This symbol most likely comes from Hebrews chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, which say, "We have this hope as an anchor